Kia ora shifters. Now it is our privilege to introduce to you our next guest who is on the show. She has received an ONZM, which is Order of New Zealand Merit in 2022 for services to Māori, education and the media. She completed her PhD in 2012. She was, which is about, Māori entrepreneurship and screen production. She was a founding member of Ngā Aho Whakaari, an advocacy group for Māori in screen industry, which played an important role to assisting in the establishment of Māori television.
I know, Aunty, you're uncomfortable, but we're going to keep going. She's been a treaty negotiator for Iwi Ngāti Kahu ki Whangaroa, a TV personality on Ask Your Aunties, an executive director for Greenpeace NZ, tūmaki of Pukenga at Unitec, and a brief stint as Human Rights Commissioner. She was expelled from high school when she was 15 and went back to formal education at 30 after years of travelling the world. I think she would say her most important role is a mother of 3 amazing, strong Māori women and now nanny to 2 moko. She is Professor Ella Henry, but we call her Aunty Ella. Welcome to the morning shift. I think that's the best intro we've done for anyone.
That was pretty cosmic. I felt like leaving the room after the first 30 seconds. I was embarrassed out.
Well, when I was doing my research with your daughter, who's my very close friend, I thought, man, I was like, sis, we need to do more, eh? She was like, you're telling me. But we've got you on the show today, Aunty Ella, because you also you do political commentary too. I see you on the TV news doing, feedback on elections and things. They ask you the big questions. So I thought, why not have Aunty Ella to come in and talk about politics? Where I want to start though, Aunty, is maybe some personal takes for you, or how did you find this election? What were things that you looked for or things that you found interesting now that the special votes are counted, and what does that kind of mean?
Yeah, well, I think the last few elections... first of all, i te timatanga, me mihi atu kia koutou katoa, kia koro e tēnā koutou. So I think one of the things that has happened in recent years has been the increasingly vitriolic tone of election campaigns, and that's been exacerbated, I think, personally, by these polls that come out and start pitting parties together before we actually go into the polling booth.
I haven't got questions about that.
And so I think that's been getting worse, and this was particularly, I thought, unpleasant because of the amount of anti-Māori rhetoric that was being used. The get rid of the treaty referendum or change the treaty principles, legislation, yada yada. The race-based policies, being anti-race-based. I'm sorry, but this country is founded on race-based policies created by white people to take our land from us. That's the history of this country. And now that Māori are able to address some of those inequities in tiny, tiny ways, we are being blamed for trying to create race-based policies, which quite frankly is bullshit. So, that I think coloured the negative aspects of this campaign, and I think it's getting worse, and I think we need to all stand up and say to media who contribute to it in some way, because they film the inflammatory confrontations. They espouse a lot of the stuff that's coming out of the spin doctors. So I think there's a role to be had in just chilling it all down in the lead up to the election.
I always wonder about those polls. Who does those polls? I never see anything about them, and all of a sudden in the news they're coming up left, right and centre.
And just probably more specifically, what is the damage to seeing those polls like to the psyche of the public?
Exactly. Those are really good questions. Nobody has a definitive answer to them, but what I think is really important is one of the things they tell us about is what the Māori vote is. But considering that the polls have to phone you, and the vast majority of Māori I know no longer have a landline, and nobody has got our cell phone number.
It's like radio. All these old mediums, the way they do it.
So how are they getting a hold of this, representative Māori sample? So what we found...
So the polls come from calling, landlines?
Yeah, vast majority of them. Because how else what are you going to do? How are you going to get people?
And I also heard it's 20 minutes, give or take, to do it. So who has 20 minutes if you have a landline these days to actually sit down and do it?
Exactly. And so...
And that's a certain demographic of people that are going to be home on the landline,
right? It's got to be representative,
right?
like 70% of our population live in urban areas. 60% of our population are under 30, so unless you've got a sample that is representative of the real population, it's dodgy statistics. So we had a lot of statistics beforehand that none of them calculated what Te Pāti Māori was going to end up with. 6 electorates. None of them were saying that. Actually, there was one company, I can't remember its name. It's basically based in Australia and does polling, and they were pretty accurate, and they use the same people. So they, I guess, over the years pulled together a database of people, but then they're probably giving them money to answer questions, so it's all a bit dodgy. A lot of information out there is dodgy as, man.
And this is Professor Al Henry, by the way. It's not just Aunty down the road. So I believe what you're saying. What's up, Marc?
Yeah, I just, Aunty, Jordan asked a really good question in the sense that what does it do to the psyche of the population when they do go and see a poll where, the Māori Party might not be rating as highly as it is?
I think it's highly influential for certain segments of the population, right? So those who don't delve deep into politics and they see a poll and they go, oh, look, National's going to win. Why bother voting? Why would I bother voting? The counter to that, and we saw that so well at this election, the counter to it was an incredible campaign run by both the Greens and Te Pāti Māori to attract young voters. And who in this country has not heard of Hana Rāwhiti? And that phrase, the kohanga generation is coming, but don't be afraid, which means be afraid. Which was fabulous. And that's reflected in the vote. It's reflected in the participation of our rangatahi, our younger voters. So, yes, you can damage the psyche with a series of polls that push a particular perspective, but you can also change that psyche with a range of powerful, strong messages, and we certainly saw that coming from Te Pāti Māori, from the Greens, and the counter to that, obviously, was Winston Peters coming in quite late in the show and attracting a lot of very strange old people. Because they love looking at him. You see him out, you see them outside one of his gigs, and there's all these gushing 75-year-old women going, he's so handsome, and he also dresses so well. I mean, so he's out there affecting the psyche of them. So it's a multi-layered street, that one.
What about the? It's funny you do mention the late swing in of Winston Peters in New Zealand First. How disruptive, though, do you think it was? I guess the vote for Māori Party members in creating the overhang in Parliament, and now I guess some of those promises that parties made on the right are going to be hard to be able to pull off. Right? Is that have we disrupted what was supposed to be a pretty sweet little ride-in for National?
I would so love to be able to say categorically that Māori stage managed this, that we are smart enough to have created absolute chaos for the National Party. But all the evidence suggests this was kind of accidental. However, the overhang, happy coincidence, the overhang has, as you said, created a very difficult position for Christopher Luxon, because he now has to bring 3 parties together. And I was thinking yesterday, it's a good thing he's already bald. Because I'm telling you, the next 3 years is going to have him tearing the last few hairs on his head out.
So this is, you're so right. I think it's going to be tough. Obviously, it's a coalition government. I think they ended up on 38% National had.
The leaders of the 2 parties he is in coalition with hate each other.
So that's my question. How do you see this having any chance of working?
It's going to be like every meeting they have of a caucus. He's going to be a marriage guidance counsellor trying to stop them from killing each other. I mean, the thing I've learned about Winston Peters over the years, he's very courtly, he's very gentlemanly, he's very courteous for those of you who have interacted with him. He's a charming fellow. Very bright, very erudite. Comes from North. Does not forget. Does not forgive.
The North remembers.
The North remembers.
He's a Stark. Well, I almost feel like, is it what's happening with Christopher Luxon having to manage these? Is it almost with me and Matamako talking off air, we're like, is it karma for running a campaign of such extremes? Well, and now they have to deal with extreme compromise between each other.
I think New Zealand, as a large portion of New Zealand, took a step against the Labour Party. And I think a lot of that had to do with the post-COVID reaction. We were the proudest country in the world throughout 2020. We all locked ourselves away with pride. And we saved tens of thousands of lives. But there's huge debate about how much longer that should have gone on. And that creates rifts in society. And so I think a lot of the people were not so much voting for a right-wing coalition, but against the Labour Party, and that's very clear.
Now that we have you, because I've always thought like I suppose the backlash of Jacinda's time and the way that people get so angry and worked up, and you would when people lost their marriages, people lost their businesses. People have broken homes now based on what we went through COVID, and there's we always talk about politics and transactionally, but the emotional toll of this nation and what we're still trying to catch up on is clearly evident now. But for me, it's going, if we're so critical of that Labour government and we need change, what else would they have done differently?
And that's the most important thing, because we have to some degree thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Because some of the things that have occurred on Labour's watch in 6 years, which actually I thought one of the best speeches that Chris Hipkins gave was his speech the night that he was conceding defeat. And he gave a really beautiful, poignant, heartfelt kōrero about what they've achieved. 35,000 houses built. No other government's done that for decades. The Māori Health Authority, the changes to criminal, some good shit happened on their watch.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, all we saw was our own personal trauma. And
which was hard to miss,
It's
right?
hard to mash those two. And if you're fortunate, and we are, I'm privileged. I get to travel overseas as part of my day-to-day job. And I've had the opportunity to go to other countries and see how hard they did it compared to us. Yes, we did it hard, but we saved tens of thousands of lives by going harder for just a little bit longer. And yes, personal trauma was involved for many, many people. But what was the alternative? To have lost not just your job, but your family. And so weighing that up, you get to be able to do that retrospectively, looking backwards, but the people in the heart of that are the ones who are angry, and they voted with their feet. And so I think that this is not a bad thing for the left. I mean, all around the world there's a crisis of the left, because the right, which is about less government and more wealth creation and let's develop and exploit the planet until there's nothing left, that's that end of the political spectrum. The other end has been in crisis because the left has not had the resources to present a good enough argument to counter the persuasive power of the powerful.
So shouldn't we just try suss the middle?
Absolutely. The middle is the safest ground, but it's defining the middle. Te Pāti Māori is considered an extreme radical activist group.
Yeah, no.
But you go back in history, though. Remember the people who protested for the whenua in the 70s were called terrorists. The people who protested for rugby in 1981 were called terrorists. The people who marched in 2004 over the Foreshore and Seabed Act were called terrorists. All we were whānau trying to protect what little we have left. And when Māori get stuff back, we don't exclude anybody. We're not the ones shutting off beaches. That's not Māori iwi doing that unless there's a rāhui because somebody's died or there's some pollution. So we've been called terrorists for so long, we've started to believe the bad publicity. But the reality is all we're trying to do is protect our country, protect our people. So we do occupy the middle, but the middle tells us we're the extreme left. It's all smoke and mirrors, dude.
Hey, I know. That's why I got you on here. I think just like for those who listen, we do have a national government. We do have ACT, and for whatever reason, if you don't agree with those parties, we still have to have a government that rules this nation. How do we? I see how we're so and because it is vindictive sometimes, because these politicians know what to say to swing our emotions, we can be so swayed by what they have to say, and for good reason sometimes. But how do we stay hopeful for the future and what National and that are going to do, and how should we engage in politics in a way where we don't feel like the people at the head have a say, and we should disengage because we can't do anything about it? How do we continue to?
I use a term called civil literacy. So when you go to school, you learn a little bit about banking and saving and blah, 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 financial literacy. Well, we also need civil literacy, which is how to be a good citizen. What does being a good citizen mean? And I know a lot of our people feel so disenfranchised, particularly, unfortunately, amongst rangatahi, that they don't vote. And I mean, I went through that phase in the 90s. What I like to call is my I really hate white people decade. Because I started university in the 80s and found out my history and suddenly went, what? what? They did what? So I had a very grumpy decade in my life. I got over that, thank goodness, because you don't solve any problems by hating people.
There it is.
It actually is not. It's not even good for your own health. But retrospectively. And so I was part of that group of people that I'm not going to vote, fuck the patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, if you don't participate, you end up with the leadership that you don't deserve. If you do participate, you end up with the leadership you do deserve. And so participation is about figuring out not just who's going to give you the best for you, but who's going to create the best space for your whānau, your tamariki mokopuna, And that to me is what civil literacy is. It's knowing that I need to go and find out about what's going on, even though sometimes you have to read some excruciatingly boring stuff and listen to some people that you feel like they might just leave a snail trail. You know what I mean?
Got it.
You just gotta go out and engage with them so that you can make an informed decision. I always I teach leadership, Māori leadership, and I always say to my students, you ever meet a Māori that says they're a leader, you should run in the opposite direction as far as you can go, because in our world, you do not define yourself as a leader. The people do. The people who stand up and sing for you. That you are their leader. They make you a leader. So people say we have, lots of leaders. We have a crisis of leadership. I say, no, we have a crisis of followership. Because great followers make great leaders. Bad followers follow fools. And so civil literacy is about understanding who is the great follower for you and your whānau and your hapari, your community.
See,
I love that.
That confirms what I've been saying. That's why I meet so many politicians and I just think they're losers. And the best way of it just feels like they're that kid in class that, won the class, captain award, or they're trying to but the real leaders know that they often can only affect at an arm's length. So they avoid leadership because they don't have this itch that needs scratching where people can hold them up. And so I always feel that crisis of leadership, but changing that to crisis of followership, wow, that blew my mind.
In our traditional society, what I've learned is that there was no hierarchy of leadership. There was nobody at the top. There was always a community of leaders. So, and you know that. When you go to a marae where everything is humming, there's somebody in charge of digging the hole. There's somebody in charge of the dive. There's somebody in charge of the kitchen. And I worked for a while when I was at Unitec with a really beautiful kaumātua called Koro John Tude. It's a John. And he used to teach me stuff just by being who he was, So you can always tell who the real leader is on the marae. They've got a tea towel in their hand, right?
Do the dishes.
Do that dishes, dude. and the other thing is, he said, it took me till I was 70 till I made the front row of the pai, and we're just the decoration. That's all we are. Everybody else is what the marae is, not just the people sitting on the pai. We have been seduced by this notion of hierarchy to assume the pai is the top of a hierarchy, but it's not. It's just a part of the whare. And so we need to build that capability and realise that every single person has value, every single job has value. Yes, some people will get paid more because they've got more risk associated with their work and ka pai tēnā. But the reality is, until we can have that kind of egalitarian society, then we're always going to have injustice and inequality. And that's the foundation of hatred and social unrest.
Ooh. You said something earlier, everyone went out and that was dope. They voted with their feet. And I love that. And history tells us it's going to go this way, and then, a few years later it's going to go that way, left, right, blue, red. That's always going to be. I'm of the firm belief that you should run a country as a charity almost, as opposed to a business. And I think at the moment it's about to be run more of in a business sense. What's your thoughts on that, on running us as a business as opposed to a charity?
The charities, you got to watch them too, though. They take a lot of fees.
Well, I prefer to think of them as non-profit organisations.
We'll go with that, yeah.
Non-profits.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at history, James Cook arrived in 1769. He introduced us to the world and dropped off a few bits and pieces which over time transformed our economy. Prior to that, we didn't have money. We didn't have a large government machine, but we had a an egalitarian non-profit organisation called Aotearoa. Then outsiders came in and we found profit from trading with them. If you read Hazel Petrie's book about corporate warriors and chiefs of trade, she talks about how in 1831, when there was probably 100 white people here, so this was all us, we manufactured goods to the tune of 34,000 pounds, which we sold just to Sydney. 34,000 pounds. That's billions now. So we were into manufacturing, we were into production, we were into international trade. All of that was going on before we became a British colony. Right? So we understood the dynamics of the marketplace, but that did not mean that we had tribes with big houses or fancy, all those resources were coming back to the tribe, to the community, to the people. And so we know what a country that's run like a charity looks like, because that's what we had here until, February the 6th, 1840, when everything changed fundamentally. And I, of course, from my own perspective as a wahine Māori, what you've got to remember is on the day we signed the treaty and became British citizens, Māori women, in British law, we became British, and in Britain in 1840, women were chattels. They were like belongings. That's why they were born with their father's name until they were given away in marriage, and then they got their husband's name, and all their children had their husband's name. So there's no female whakapapa in Western thinking. And I come from Ngāti Kahu, and she was a hard woman. And I'm happy to come from her, mate. You know what I mean? So all of those things that we lost as a part of the treaty process, we've had to start thinking about how we rebuild. And leadership, we have to rebuild. Mana wahine, we have to rebuild. Economies founded on principles of manaakitanga and aroha, we have to rebuild, because we know they once worked.
I always like that sentiment, like our strength isn't often not, there's the woke culture of like waking up. It's actually reverse. Our strength is in remembering. Yes. Like it's actually backwards. Like we already had.
And, if you know the origin of the word woke, it's such a beautiful term that a black poet created to conscientize his people because they were asleep because oppression, is like a narcotic. Oppression will put you to sleep before it kills you. And the reason we need to wake each other up is so that we can understand the nature of oppression and be free.
Oh, come on.
No, but that's why he invented that word. So I always feel really uncomfortable when white people say woke. I go, do you know the origin of that word? That's our word,
because you're professor. It's your professor.
That's our word, mate.
Yeah.
But the opposite is we have in Te Ao Māori, and not just Te Ao Māori, in the Pacifica, because we are all cousins. We are all from the same bones across the Pacific, is that whilst woke is being awake and alert and aware is critically important to a people who live by the sea, right? So 5,000 years we've been travelling the ocean. Every island in the Pacific, which again is a coloniser word, Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, we populated, we named. That's our continent. This is our continent. And so, that's the woke bit. But we also have the moi moi a dream bit. And so being woke is important, but loving your dreams is also important. And it's how you keep those two balanced that I think give you the greatest level of health.
Well, balance and health is kind of what I think we all hope for. I think it's okay at the moment to maybe feel scared, or it's the fear of the unknown and it's a little bit new to us. It does feel a little bit doom and gloom at the moment, but I know that you would also probably understand there are places that are going to be okay. We need to navigate these waters a little bit better. How do we find some hope and some joy and what's going to be around, I guess, for the next at least 3 years?
And this is me being as absolutely frank as I can be. Papatuanuku is burning. We are in real trouble as a species, right? Not just this country or these people, but as a species. Because when we make this planet uninhabitable, there will be critters that survive. 64 million years from now, the place is going to be run by cockroaches and sharks, because they are the only critters that will survive what we are doing to the planet right now, unless we can make some fundamental changes. So you fellas who are parents, you look at your kids, I look at my mokos, and I am fearful too, like you. What have I done that is going to create this untenable future for these beautiful babies that we have created. And once you see that that's real, then you have to think about what small thing can I do? You know what I mean? Have a compost bin. You know, we now have a council that collects compost.
Okay, sorry, I don't want plastic straws back. Sorry, I've been advocating plastic straws back. Sorry, Auntie, I just want to say that.
No, but I mean, there are so many alternatives. There are little things, there are big things. Just doing something, I think, is the critical thing. Because if you allow yourself to be so affected by the negative potential of the future,
just flooded everywhere today.
It will just drown you, you know. And the thing is, we are a people of the sea. That's what we are. We have negotiated the oceans for thousands of years, living by our wits. We looked at the horizon and we saw opportunity. In Britain, they looked at the horizon and they saw dragons. We are the dragons of the horizon. So we have to just hold on to that during the dark and the hard times, because that's what's going to help us deal with the negativity of what may be coming and try to transform it into some different future.
I'm ready to run through a wall.
Yeah, is it coming though? Auntie, like I, you're talking about civil literacy, and for there'd be no one who's more literate in the civil services than you right now. So can we look to you and do a little bit of crystal balling? And it's always hard to predict, but with the current government setup, with National Act, New Zealand First, all being a part of an alliance, who do you think wins out of all of this in the next 3 years? If you can look through the crystal ball, I know it's hard to predict, but what's your instinct tell you?
Well, I think landlords will do really well. With the tax benefits that look like they might go through in the first 100 days. And for all those people that own hundreds of properties, the tax breaks they'll get is going to be fabulous. That's another holiday, you know, wherever they want in the world. For the average person, I think not so much. And for the poor and the most vulnerable, the pulling back of the Māori Health Authority, the pulling back of the fair pay agreement, the bringing in of foreign investors, all of those things may well have a much more negative impact. But I think the bigger issue, and the one that really, we can survive 3 years of mediocre government. We've done it for a long time. It's how we are putting our energy, and this is why I'm so happy that the Greens have got a really solid cohort. I mean, I don't talk about which political parties I vote for, but I do think every party needs to have a green policy. And so some of the positives that they brought in at the last one, around carbon and protection, the fact that if they're rolled back, then we are taking a big step backwards. And you talked about how I was the executive director of Greenpeace. This was 94 to 96, so nearly 30 years ago. Everything, we used to get reports from Greenpeace International, big science. Greenpeace invented some amazing stuff, Every report I read in that 3-year period that I worked for Greenpeace has come to pass. In less than 30 years. They were talking about a 0.5 degree temperature rise of the ocean hitting us by 2030 to 2040. It happened in 2020. So the process of destruction of Papatūānuku is escalating. So to get back to your question, I think that our civil literacy does require us to have some political literacy, but also some environmental literacy, and how we can advocate for the most. And I know that our economy is going to be affected, and it's a balance. I'm not standing on some soapbox and saying I have the answer, because I don't. But we do have to balance economic well-being with environmental security, and how we do that requires strong political leadership. And I'm not sure. I'm waiting to see the strong political leadership from this particular coalition on environmental issues, given that David Seymour has said some pretty strange things about,
Oh, Davey.
Auntie, I always wonder who's pulling the actual strings. And I wonder that right now more so than ever.
The Illuminati.
We're quite lucky, and I have a soft spot because I find him a bit of a paradox,
Rothschilds.
actually. Christopher Luxon, we've actually known for a while, and I feel like the person that we talk to when the mics go and then when the lights turn off are different people. And that's why I always wonder who's actually pulling the strings here, who's really in power, who Who's in charge?
I mean, I think we're fairly lucky in this country in many ways because we don't have a strong a political lobby group. I mean, if you look at American politics, basically...
They can pay their politics, right?
Yeah, you know,
Pay the
I
outcome.
mean, the billions of... the cases that are coming up of the extraordinary corruption, and that's why people voted for Trump, because they were sick of the corruption of Washington, and then they got Trump. Be careful what you wish for, you know.
And they got Biden too, though, Auntie.
He's been asleep for 3 years.
So, you know, I mean, we have to be grateful for small mercies. And I think that we have a relatively, and this has been checked out by the United Nations, we have a relatively corruption-free society. We have a very strict controls over who gives money to political parties, so the chances of that level of corruption are much, much slimmer in this country. So having said that, I think that we can say fairly confidently that the people who are pulling the strings in this country are reasonably well known. You know, we know the powerful behind the ones who've given millions of dollars to right-wing parties. We know who they are because it's publicly known. So I think that lessens some of the concern we have to worry about. Yeah. But that still means we have to keep an eye on them. You know, I mean, and I guess that's why you have those people in your community that, you know, on the double-hulled waka, you had the shift of the people whose sole job was to monitor the horizon.
No, I love that. Hey, this has been an absolute whirlwind of a conversation, but I love it. You are Auntie to us, but you are Professor Ella Henry. Thank you for your time, Auntie. Thank you for your wisdom and your knowledge. It was really needed today. So thank you.
Ka pai o koutou mahi. I think you guys are doing a fabulous job.
Thank you. Professor said that to us. The professor said that to us.